I'm Deanna Bremer Fisher, and I'm the Executive Director of Future Heights. We're a nonprofit that encourages community engagement, and we do that by providing information, education, and advocacy on issues that are important to residents. And one of the things that we think is quite important and interesting is our rich and interesting history that we have here in Cleveland Heights. And so every year we partner with the City of Cleveland Heights Landmarks Commission and the Cleveland Heights Historical Society to put on a number of programs about our history. And so before we get to tonight's program, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the other programs that we have planned for Preservation Month, which is actually the month of May. And this program has grown over the years, and we have such a good wealth of programs this year that we're actually starting out here on April 28th with our very first program this evening. So after this evening's program, our next program is May 21st, which is a walking tour of Euclid Heights allotment. And I see Marion Morton here in the audience, and she is going to be leading that tour. It should be quite interesting. And then on May 28th, we'll have a walking tour of the Shaker Farm neighborhood, which is currently being researched and written up to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So that's coming up on May 28th. Then on June 23rd, we're going to have another lecture, The History of Grant Deming's Forest Hill Allotment, and that was the neighborhood that was listed in the National Register last year. Then on Saturday, June 25th, we're also partnering with Lakeview Cemetery, and I'm going to be doing a walking tour of Cleveland Heights residents that now reside at Lakeview Cemetery. So I hope you'll be able to join us for some of those programs, and you'll hear more about them. I know that we had issues of the Heights Observer, which is the publication that Future Heights produces each month, and we will have more information about these upcoming programs in the May issue. There's one other event that I'd like to tell you a little bit about, and that is an event that is being put on by the Sustainable Heights Network. Future Heights is a member of Sustainable Heights Network, which is a network of organizations and individuals that is promoting sustainability here in the Heights area. And we're putting on a program on May 10th at Rockefeller's Restaurant. It begins at 6 o'clock and will end at 8 o'clock. It's called Public Leadership in Sustainability. And we've invited Bob Brown from the City of Cleveland to give us a short presentation about how public leadership in the City of Cleveland is promoting sustainability. And then we've invited the Mayor of University Heights, Susan Infeld, and the Mayor of Cleveland Heights, Ed Kelly, to speak with us about what their organizations are doing in terms of sustainability and how we can help. And then we've also invited Superintendent Doug Hoyer and Library Director Nancy Levin to also share with us what their organizations are doing to promote sustainability, and again, how residents can help. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that program as well. And now I'm going to introduce Kara Hamley O'Donnell, who will tell you about one more initiative that the City of Cleveland Heights has been working on together with other groups, and we're very excited about it. Kara?
Thank you. Real quick before I get into the new initiative, I did want to point out that this is also in conjunction with the Cleveland Heights Historical Society, and I'm sure many of you picked up their latest newsletters on the back table. If you haven't, make sure you pick those up before you leave. One is sort of based on what Eric is presenting this evening. So, pardon? Louder. Sorry. Can you hear me now? So anyway, make sure you pick these up. One has some written information about the Heights schools, and the other one talks about the history, some of the Shaker history that's present in Cleveland Heights. So that one's sort of a preview of some of the things you'll get also later in another one of the presentations that Deanna pointed out. The next thing I want to talk about is a cooperative project with the City of Cleveland Heights Planning Department, where I work, the Landmark Commission, which is a volunteer organization which I staff as part of the City of Cleveland Heights. It's made up of residents of the community, and with Cleveland State University's digital history component. We're lucky enough to have one of the members of that staff on our Landmark Commission, and so we've been working really closely with him to take some oral histories that we did 5-10 years ago, which we had done and then sort of sat there. We couldn't really share them. We also have a collection of over 1,000 historic photos, and the idea of Cleveland State that they've started is something called a mobile history app. Now, I don't know how many people in this room have a smartphone. I am not one of them. My phone makes calls. That's it. But if you have an iPhone and if you have a Droid, what you can do, and if you have access to the Internet, for those of us who are sort of behind the times with our phones, this is information that's also available on the Internet. But what will be popping up in the next couple months in places in Cleveland Heights, and this is this is literally hot off the presses. It was, we just printed it up today. This is a sort of a teaser about some of the historical things we're going to have available. We did the Heights High one to tie in with what Eric's presentation is this evening. And what they will be is sort of a mini Ken Burns-style documentary on various sites around Cleveland Heights. So, for example, this poster would be hung in Heights High or the Board of Education. It has a couple little quotes, a little history of the school. And if I've got an iPhone, I'd walk up and there's this little squiggly thing that's sort of a modern version of a barcode. And I would take my iPhone and I would pop it up against that, and I would download the application from Cleveland State University, and then it would locate me where I am. It would say, oh, you're at Heights High. Click here, and we're going to tell you a little 2 or 3 minute documentary on Heights High. Or you're standing at the Cedar Lee Theater waiting in line to buy your tickets. We'll have a poster in the Cedar Lee. You'll click your phone on that. 2 or 3 minute documentary on the history of the Cedar Lee with old pictures, oral histories that people had done on that thing. So this is very cutting edge. It's, it's really, Cleveland is at the forefront of doing this, and we're lucky enough that we've gotten in on that. Now, for those of us who don't, we can read this information on the posters that'll be around town. We'll have one at Kane Park this summer. We'll have them at Cumberland Pool. So some of the more public places that a lot of people, both locals and people coming in from out of town, will see. The other place you can see this, and all this, these haven't gone live yet on the application or on the website, but if you keep an eye on the Cleveland Heights website, we'll have an update, which is clevelandheights.com. We'll have an update of when these things have really kicked off and are going. But they also will be available through Cleveland State's YouTube channel. So if you don't have a smartphone, you can go onto YouTube and you can watch these little videos. And there are a bunch of them up there now on various places around Cleveland, anywhere from League Park to the Terminal Tower, those kind of sites. And that website is www.youtube.com/user/CSU Digital Humanities. I'll put this sheet that I printed off the internet that's got the site at the bottom, and I'll put it on the back page if anyone wants to copy that down. And it will be on our website once all of this stuff goes live. So that's kind of a really exciting thing that we're one of the few communities outside of Cleveland that are involved in, although a lot of other communities are calling us and saying, hey, that sounds pretty neat, we want to do it. So I think we're kind of at the forefront on that. With that said, I hope everyone will get a chance to check that out. And I'm going to introduce Eric now. Eric, and I'll put this back up at the entrance. So on your way out, if any of you do have a smartphone and want to zap it, and if you do, I would love to know if it actually works. It's supposed to work, but no one around me is that high in technology to have the right phone. So Eric Silverman grew up in Cleveland Heights. He's a second-generation Heights High graduate, class of 1987. He attended Oxford and Monticello schools, and then he went on to Miami University of Ohio. At one time or another, Eric has lived in attendance zones for Oxford, Noble, Garrity, Canterbury, Fairfax, Coventry, and Boulevard. So he gets around Cleveland Heights. He knows it. He knows these schools, and he knows this community's history. And he also is a former school board member from 1993 and in 1997. He was appointed to the Cleveland Heights University Heights Library Board in 2002 during the time of the main library renovation. And he also helped to create the Cleveland Heights High School Alumni Association in 1995, and he has served as a trustee on that organization until 2001. He also created the Cleveland Heights Alumni Foundation in 2001. He's been their president since 2002. And the Alumni Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit which maintains a database of 50,000 graduates, produces and sells Heights merchandise, assists reunions, maintains the foundation's website, publishes a full-color newsletter twice a year, which you'll see some of those newsletters on that back table, so make sure you get some of those if you haven't already. And it coordinates the Heights High Hall of Fame, and it holds a pancake breakfast that was just a couple weeks ago that was a lot of fun. And they do the holiday cocktail party in the fall as well. And then they also offer grants and scholarships over $25,000 a year. And they work with the school district to coordinate the systems archive, all of which Eric does on a totally volunteer basis. He's a busy guy, and you can absolutely tell Eric's passion for the schools and the school district and this community as a whole. So you enjoy all these old photographs, and I believe a lot of them are on the Alumni Association website, and so you can kind of look those. And he also has them placed around the rooms to look at afterward. With that, I'll introduce Eric Silverman.
Good evening, and thank you. Since I've been introduced, I don't have to do my standard. My name is Eric Silverman. So this evening, with the impetus for me doing the article that was in the newsletter, and then the Heights Observer ran the article, and then for the presentation was the school district is looking at a top-to-bottom examination of the facilities. And I was part of that. I'm on that committee, and we toured every building in the district. We went from the boiler rooms up to the rooftops, and literally we climbed the top of the auditorium at the high school, the science wing, and in doing that, we saw a lot of good and a lot of bad. And in part of that process was examining some of the blueprints for the district, because on the committee, and looking at a lot of the detail, and that's why we have the blueprints around here. So the idea was to take a look back at, people think, it's been almost 40 years since the last major construction project. And our buildings really go back, some of them almost 100 years. So the idea here is to start with the beginning of the Cleveland Heights School District when we left East Cleveland Township, and then up to the more recent era. For those of you who are looking forward to lots of slides of the footprint buildings and the buildings built after World War II, you're going to be disappointed. We're going to probably do more of an emphasis on the pre-war structures. The other thing, too, is that there's a number of questions I don't have the answers for. So if somebody can tell me why Noble Road School faces the side street as opposed to Noble Road, let us know. So there'll be some other questions as well. So just you're already sitting back. As I sit back and enjoy. So we'll start the slideshow right now. Let's see. So we're going to start with what the original components of the district from the really old schools, which most folks don't even have any recollection of. This one pretty much everyone knows, the Superior Road Schoolhouse. We have in the images you're going to have three different ones. The restored building, a photograph from I want to say the 1910 annual report for the school district is the one in the middle, and then a photograph from the 1960s when the schoolhouse was ostensibly boarded up, and then eventually the city did a phenomenal job on the restoration of it. Then here we have the first true Cleveland Heights school, Lee Road School, built in 1902 by George Hammond, and then quickly they had an addition to the structure in the back. You can see here from the, if I can use my other pointer. You can see here. Now, these photographs are from the early 1960s, prior to the building being demolished. Do you know what the cross streets were? This would be pretty much right where the not the parking lot, just north of the parking lot of Boulevard School is where this building would have been. Here's another image. This is an image closer to, and that's like not Cumberland. There's the cross street between Cumberland and Lee Road. You can see here, this is what they ended up doing was by the early 1960s, this building was very worn down, and what they did was they demolished it when they built the Board of Education building on Miramar. This building was demolished to make larger playing fields for Roosevelt School. Eventually, there was 4 buildings on this site. Lee Road School would have been the first one. And then we have, this is the Board of, after Heights High, and once the city really came into its being, it went from being a school building, because it was the first Heights High, it ended up being the Board of Education building. And the trees we have in this photograph here, those trees are still standing. So if you're driving down Lee Road, there'll be like this little, I think the word's in a Lee, there's 3 trees, and there's 6 trees in 2 rows. They're still standing there. So it was one of the few things that survived the 72 bond issue at the Boulevard. There's a cross street, there's a little side street that cuts between Lee Road and Cumberland, so this would be just about at that intersection. Now, the next building we're talking about would be Roxboro Elementary School, built in another George Hammond building in 1905. This is a plat map, and the reason I want to have the map here is when we look later on at the current Roxelle, I think there's a distinct possibility that the 1905 building that was built is actually the current auditorium at Roxboro Elementary School. But what's interesting also is that the site is much smaller than what we're familiar with now. And you can see the building is very, very similar to Lee Road School, similar design, built in 1905 by Hammond. And the next one here is Noble Road School. Now, the buildings that the district sort of inherited from East Cleveland Township would have been a Noble Road School and Roxboro. They weren't these buildings. These are the buildings that were actually built by the Cleveland Heights schools. And the reason I have this slide is you can see sort of why Noble Road School is where it is on the site, why it's facing the side street as opposed to Noble Road. If someone has an answer, that'd be great. We can also see that there were a number of there were homes actually built on that school site that eventually would have been cleared away for Noble School. And then here's a good shot of Noble School. This would be taken after Noble's built because it's there in the background. And Nancy Levin probably would love this. This is the one of the branches of the Noble Library. Here, this is a photograph from a annual report for the school district showing the school. And again, these weren't very large buildings because at this juncture, the population was still very, very low in the community. Let's see my next one. Now, in the teens, I'm going to show you some information, data that shows you the population growth. The city fathers really knew that the community was going to be transitioning from basically an ex-urban borderland area to high-density residential. And what was smart was they planned accordingly for it, too. So one of the first buildings we have here is Roosevelt built originally Cleveland Heights High School, then Roosevelt Junior High, 1915 by Walker and Weeks. And Walker and Weeks is known for a huge amount of buildings they built in the city of Cleveland. Severance Hall, Lorraine Carnegie Bridge, a number of the buildings in the group plan. I mentioned Severance Hall already. What's interesting is compared to a lot of stuff they did, this is not their most flamboyant work. But it was a solid building. It gave the district a lot of solid use. And what I have here, and we have a number of these photographs online, is what they would basically they took the class photos right in the front steps. And what's great to watch is you can see like we have the photo display in the back, the changes in the students over time in fashion. But what strikes me, and especially in the demeanor, is when we have the early photographs, the kids are they seem very happy to have their picture taken. And in the 1950s, they're still very happy and, I want to say serene, but they're okay. The 1960s as well. But by the late 60s, early 70s, they really seemed angry in the photographs. There's a number of photographs. The kids just seem like, they're like, why are you taking my photograph? And what's also interesting, too, is you can see really the change that, kids had a very, very formal, rigid dress code, which by the 1970s was thrown out the window. But we have a number of these photographs online from Roosevelt because first, it was one of the great things that actually has survived is that we've got, I want to say, a couple hundred photographs of these class photos, which are really great. And then we have the fate of Roosevelt Junior High, which was demolition in the 1970s. As I mentioned before, originally where the Boulevard School is now, there were 4 buildings: Roosevelt, Lee Road School, Boulevard, and then I believe they combined or shared power plant as well. Now, this is what I was talking about before. This is from a 1920s facility study. And what you see here is that there was tremendous increase in population density and growth. And the other component, too, is that between the Rockefeller estate and the Severance estate, the community was really growing into two separate areas. But we have here in a lot of the areas in the sections in the Fairfax, Roxboro, and Coventry area, by the 1920, we're already very, very built up. And this is from that 1920s facility study report. And what you see here is that eventually the city was getting to a rate of building approximately 1,000 housing units a year. And I mean, when you really stop back and think about it, I mean, that's 1,000 homes being built a year, every year in the Heights. And also Forest Hills in the Severance estate and a number of the streets off of Quilliams and Cleveland Heights over by Oxford were undeveloped as well. So that's a tremendous amount of construction in a very, very narrow part of the community. And the other thing, too, is that they were anticipating huge growth. They were expecting that if the Severance estate and Rockefeller estate were built at the same density as the rest of the community, they were anticipating a population of over 100,000 people living in Cleveland Heights. I know that our current city leaders would love to keep us at 50,000 people, but they were anticipating a population of that height. And the same thing with the school enrollment. They were anticipating very, very tremendous student enrollment, and because of that, they designed their buildings accordingly to accommodate that kind of growth. Let's see. So the first building we have in this period would be Fairfax. Real nice, sharp building. I think this is a contractor photograph from the 1930s or so. It's got, obviously, it's been built up because it got the ivy on the walls, and the additions have been made in the back. And let's see, this is going to show you another plat map showing Fairfax built out. And the reason I'm showing this is that on the next image is what we're going to see time and time again with these buildings, which I was surprised. I didn't realize until I read the blueprints, was that pretty much they would do is they would build the front of the building. They'd frequently had a very large auditorium, very large cafeteria, the power plant. That was what they built. And there was only maybe 8 classrooms when the building was first built. And then very frequently, as soon as they were done with construction of this first phase, boom, they would add a wing onto the building. And Fairfax is a good example because in this next image, the photo on the top, that's what was originally built. And you can see that they didn't have the 2 wings hadn't been built yet. And then by this photograph here in the bottom right from the 1960s, the wings had been built. And the other nice thing what they had done, or they did, which we haven't done in a long time since then, is that the design of the additions is so exact with the original structure, you can't tell old from new. This was pretty much all the additions up until 1950 were done like this. And we got a couple more. Another photograph of Fairfax. I think this is from the 1950s. I think right before the bond issue in the 50s. And then this, I thought this was a good photo because while the buildings are very, it's a red school building, there's still a lot of really great ornamentation and detail around the front doors, which is great, and especially when we're going to see in Coventry, they're real nice detail work. And let's see, and I've got, then we have the current Fairfax. The one thing I will say of the design work, what's nice is that I told Steve Shigalis, the building facilities manager, was that they had these giant, they were asphalt shingles, and they replaced them with these new roofs, which are much more energy efficient, they're much tighter. And I said to him, it makes such a tremendous difference. As much as I still am no fan of the footprint buildings, I like the roof, so at least it's something. And then we have here now Coventry in 1907 is from Mr. Warner. Another thing we're going to notice too is that in different eras there was pretty much sort of, Warner did a number of the schools in this period. Then subsequently it would have been, I'm drawing a blank at his name, it'll be in there in a second. There was another architect who was doing a lot of stuff in the 20s into the 30s. So pretty much they would have sort of one architect who was doing the majority of their work. Now what this is here is that in Coventry has long had controversy. There was a lot of controversy over building Coventry to begin with. The neighbors were complaining that the horror that would be of having an elementary school next to this woman who spent so much money on her gardens that it would be a travesty if they built a Coventry school there. And then this is the plat map for where Coventry is. And this is showing it after the addition had been built. And what's great about this map and some of the images shows you how the building really anchored the intersection. And they also, I think is brilliant about this design, is they took what we would now view as a very, very horrible site to design, and they took, to build on, and they took it and they created a really nice structure and took advantage of the change in elevation. And this is a floor plan, and what you're going to see here is, again, this wing here was added on after with the addition. This is the original structure. And what you're going to see in a lot of Warner's buildings is, again, the idea of having sort of, you go down a flight of stairs to your gymnasium, up a flight of stairs to an auditorium, which would also perhaps have a cafeteria with it. And it was a very efficient use of space. The other thing that's interesting is what I thought, this is where the tower was. And until I looked at the blueprints, I thought the tower was like a staircase or something like that. It was just really an ornamental feature. So here we have the detail of a Coventry school. Real nice scroll work around the front door. And then here's a photograph. This is from, I think, Kara gave it to me. Again, this shows you before the library's been built. We have the school. I think this is probably after the addition's been built. But the one thing that's great about this is that in the back here we have a small, what they would call, it would have been the temporary structure. The school district was using, because of tremendous growth, they were always building these temporary buildings to accommodate students. And I remember reading in one of the studies, I think at one time, something like between 30 and 40% of the school population was in these temporary shelters because they were always having to add on classroom space because the buildings were not catching up with the population growth. Then this is an excellent photograph of Coventry, pretty much from the steps of the library. Again, showing you that the tower that was built there and the detail work. And then this would be from where the gas station was across the street after the addition had been added on along Euclid Heights Boulevard. And I like this one. I like because the car looks really nice. So, and I think the next one, and then this gives you a good aerial view showing you that basically the scale of the building, its proximity to the intersection. So it really was a neighborhood school. It anchored the intersection, and it was a good design. And then we have the demolition. So the last part of the building demolished would have been the tower. And so, and let's see what I got next. If I can get this work. And then we, oh, I'm sorry? I'm going to say mid-70s, yeah, exactly. So there we have Roxboro Elementary School, another Warner structure. And this is the front elevation where the library is now. So, and it had these great bay windows overseeing the auditorium. A lot of nice detail. And we go to, if I can get this to work. Here we have a photograph from probably the 20s. And one of the things you're going to see, what I would recommend and suggest is keep an eye on like ornamentation and detail like this, because frequently what I've seen and looking at the photographs and I find interesting is that we see from the 20s to 30s to 40s, even into the 50s, this ornamentation and detail work is there. And then in the photographs from the 1960s, it's gone. For masonry failure, I'm not sure what it is, but nonetheless, it's gone. So by the late 60s, early 70s, these buildings they're looking sad and tired. But a lot of this great ornamentation, particularly in Boulevard, is gone. And it's really too bad. So we have, let's see. So this would be from an architectural record showing Roxboro Elementary School. And what keep an eye on here is that when we see here, this is the gymnasium, second floor is the auditorium. Roxboro is always a very small building, but let me go to the next slide. Okay, this is, I like this one because it's got the colors you can't see. There's a nice little Nash car right here. But in the photograph here is that a lot of this detail work has begun to be removed by the 60s. And let's see. And then this is a nice cross section of the building, and you can see this is the audit. Oops, oh, that's a little too fast. Let's go back. Okay. This is, if you haven't seen it, this, and I have some photographs that'll come in a second. This is the auditorium and the cross section. In Roxboro, again, it always has been a relatively small elementary school. And this is what I was talking about on the site plan. This is from the drawings for Roxboro Elementary School say alterations and additions to Roxboro School. So, and you can see here, this says existing school building, and then this is the footprint, and then from this construction drawing right here, I'm very curious. As far as I can tell from the drawings, the intention was basically to take the current building and wrap it around the original building from 1905. Let's see. And this is from Steve Tichenor. I stole it from him, so I'll give it credit because he's here. This is a great aerial photograph, and what I like about this one is it gives you the scale of the buildings, and also I always forget just how close Shaker Square is. Is that it's right across the ravine. But I love this photo. It's a great shot. Now this is the auditorium. You can see in the upper right. This is a photograph from the wonderful work in the 1970s where if it wasn't painted white, it was painted a fluorescent color. And then in the late 90s, early 2000, they did a phenomenal, a really nice renovation work where with the color scheme and the gold leaf to really bring back the detail of the space. It's not as great as it once was. I mean, it used to have stacked seating. It was an auditorium. Now it's used as a cafeteria, and the light wells were filled in. But originally it was a full mini auditorium with 2 bays of windows on each side. But instead we ended up with this. So in the 1970s they built the library on the front of the building and covered over the windows as well. Also, apparently when we were doing the tours for the facilities, there's like a sump pump in the basement, and it died. And so the gymnasium basement filled with water because a lot of the renovation work in the 1970s was it wasn't as well thought as one would hope. And because of that, a system failed and the basement flooded. So, and that's my car on the right-hand side. So, now in the 1920s, this is when we see the tremendous amount of growth in the community. And because the city fathers had planned for it, they were able to accommodate it. So this we have Noble School. Now I've got some of the posters around are Noble. And this is, again, from the side street, because typically people, when they're driving down Noble Road, they're seeing the back of the building. This is the front, another Warner structure. And then this is a John Graham, who was pretty much the second major architect the district used. He was the one who did the addition. And the reason I have this is it shows you, again, they were using the existing school well into after the new one had been built, because there was always the school growth and they could use it. And the other thing too is we're seeing the addition right here, which until I was involved in this process and looking at the blueprints, I just assumed this had been built with the rest of the building, but it wasn't the case. The other thing, the reason I like to put Graham's drawings in there, because I think they're really pretty drawings. I mean, the way it does, I think they're really sharp. So let's see. Get this. So this is a nice cross section here. And again, Noble has this really enormous, and when you think about it, because when we think about schools today, it has this enormous auditorium. And a very large auditorium for what was originally built, and the next slide will show you, was only about 8 classrooms. The other thing that's interesting, and it'll be in the next slide, let's see. This is what was built in 1922, is you've got 5 classrooms on the second floor and maybe 2 or 3 on the first floor. So that was built in the original structure. The other thing too is it has this enormous stage. And we were doing our tours, and again, in the 1970s, Noble is now the largest elementary school by square footage in the district. And in the early 70s, they closed in the stage. They closed it in to make it into 1 classroom. So the question I would pose is, why would you take the largest building in the district, baby boom is beginning to end, and you can close the stage to make 1 classroom? And there's a bunch of sinks in there. It's like, I keep going, what were you thinking? And what's amazing is they still have the detail and scroll work. So it's basically this, threw up the drywall around it. This is the cross-section of the addition that was built in a couple years later. And again, what's beautiful about the design was that the buildings were intended to have additions, and they were very symmetrical. And typically, when we were doing our tours, wherever there was problems, it usually was subsequent work, not the original structure. And when we were touring Noble, for all the negatives of what's happened over the years, they're still very, very structurally sound buildings. Then we have, this is from probably the 1920s, across the street. And this is 1950s, because the wings, the addition on the back has been built. And let's see. And then this is a great newspaper clipping from the 1954. And basically what it says is that the school district is planning to add an addition onto the building. And the PTA and the neighbors, they want the addition to match the design of the building. And instead, they got the modern design, which now is, from a structural and a mechanical standpoint, this is the more troublesome part of the building as opposed to the original 1920 structure. Let's see. And then I've got, and this is Noble today. And from this perspective, aside from the windows, it pretty much looks as it has been for the last 75 years. Now this is the original Taylor, another Warner design. I got a large poster of it as well. And what's great about this is just the detail and the artistic flourishes in it. And what's also interesting is this is what was conceived by the architect, and then this is what was built. This is from I think one of the vendors, it was from an ad, and from like the stone company. And this is right after it was built, and I'm not sure if it's conveyed completely in this illustration, but pretty much the building ends here and here. And then we're going to see in the next slide, this is a floor plan of what was built. Now, compared to a lot of the other buildings, there's a lot more classrooms in this structure. And this is before the two wings were added on as well. But again, you're going to have the same thing with Warner's other buildings, where you've got the gymnasium and then the cafeteria. Like these, you've got this octagon-shaped library and kindergarten. And I'd love, if anyone has it, I'd be very curious to see the interior design of this, because Taylor was a very, very big building. And the next slide, let's see. Oh, yes.
I'm surprised that there's cafeterias. My recollection was back in the days, kids went home for it.
Well, actually, when I say cafeteria, I'm thinking in today's utilization would be as a cafeteria. Then it would have been an auditorium. Because, I'm sorry, I'm using late 20th century nomenclature. And if we go, let me go back a slide, I can show you pretty much what they would have had for a cafeteria. One of these rooms would have been the cafeteria. So you're correct in that. Yes, sir.
And I'm struck by the fact that they have such big auditoriums. What was a major part of the school day gathering the entire student body or something?
Your guess is as good as exactly. That's what struck me, is because for us today, those spaces are used as a cafeteria, so it makes perfect sense. And even when I was at Oxford in the 70s, pretty much most of the kids still went home for lunch. But now that's what sort of hampers some of the older buildings, is that they weren't designed to have real cafeterias. The only thing I can ponder was that they intended the buildings to be added on. So, like I said, when you see Taylor in the next slide, when the two wings are built on, now the enrollment is really up there. You got me, Chris. Oh.
One possibility, I have no idea whether this is correct or not. I went to Coventry, and one of the buildings had a very large auditorium. In the 1950s and 60s, when I was there, the music programs and to an extent the theater programs were far more robust than they are now. And I can recall endless, we had 6th grade chorus, 5th grade chorus, all kinds of various music programs, and they not only performed in the auditorium, they rehearsed there as well. So my recollection is that those auditoriums got a lot of use, and then they would put on performances not only for parents, but also for the kids. So I'm sure it's not the full answer, but it got a lot of use.
Well, and I've seen, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Where exactly on Taylor?
The next photo will give you an example. One of the things I remember seeing a photograph from Noble, we haven't scanned it, is basically of a concert. And it was, adults performing at that space. And I think if we see from some of the floor plans as well, this is really in the 1920s when they're thinking, maybe perhaps more as a community center. By the time of the 1930s, when you look at, let's say, like an Oxford and a Canterbury, the gymnasium, we're no longer having that one over the other. It may be that the auditorium, if anything, is a bonus because of the structure for the gym. You look at Oxford, Oxford's got the stage off of the gym, so they're actually being much more economizing, if anything. Oh, yes?
At some time, there may have been cafeterias in schools, because if you recall, if you and Constance know this, that was the social room in the basement.
Right.
There was another room, that was originally a cafeteria.
Right.
And I don't know what years that was used as a cafeteria, because by the time we started at our kids, it was still on the cafeteria. But that had been a true cafeteria.
Gotcha. Well, I think you're right. I think to a degree, when I look at these buildings from the time period, it could have very well been that this is almost a bonus space, if you will. And if you have a much more dynamic program and a lot more activities than what we do currently, that would have been the purpose. And unfortunately, if I use the phrase cafeteria, that's because I'm thinking that's what we use them now. So they have been retasked to that. It's unfortunate, though, like I said, at Noble, you had a great stage, and now it's been closed in. I would hope that if Noble were to be renovated, that could be restored. Oh, yes.
The implications for the concept of education and pedagogy are interesting, because those spaces, because the idea, if this gentleman is correct, the idea of performance, of developing those kinds of skills and so forth is really so central, by contrast, perhaps.
Chris?
There's another strange dichotomy on top of that, and that would be that in the older schools, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, Roxboro and Hammond, for example, the gymnasium were caves.
Yeah.
They were nothing compared to what a modern school would put into a gymnasium. Coventry's, for example, was only slightly larger than this room.
Yeah.
Roxboro, doesn't
Yeah.
even have a gymnasium. They use the auditorium and basically put up basketball accoutrements in the middle of the auditorium.
Well, I think that's what you see. If anything, you almost have an inverse, because you have a gymnasium underneath the cafeteria, a gymnasium underneath the auditorium as almost a secondary thought. And then by the 1930s, Oxford and Canterbury is really the gymnasium, and then you have a stage tacked onto it that you've inverted what was being built in the teens and the 20s. Yes, sir.
Eric, also, you got to keep in mind, in most of the old, older schools, the auditorium originally had theater wood attached seating.
Right.
You would see in the regular theater.
Exactly. Well,
They were removed and converted to multi-purpose.
exactly. Oop, I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
You know why these were neighborhood schools, except the high school, until the magnet school program started in the late 70s, whatever. Do you know why the trend became to do away with the going, why they started these cafeterias in the schools? Why was that a trend?
Well, do you have the answer?
Yeah.
Okay,
Very good
there you go.
answer. Danny President, Coventry, 1971, and at that time, we realized that up to that point, we always thought Cleveland Heights mothers were at
Right.
home at lunch. Okay, so I myself went in as a paraprofessional at lunch at Coventry School, and we had about 30 kids every day that came there. It prevented the latchkey kids
Right.
at home. So that's when that started in the 70s, because mothers weren't home anymore.
Well, exactly, because I recall when I began at Oxford in the early 70s, I came home for lunch. Then by middle of my time there, my mom went back to work, and I would stay for lunch. At that time, it was kids who stayed for lunch into the early mid-70s was only maybe, it was not the majority. By now, it is the overwhelming, I think it's almost compulsory now. So you went from a situation where only a few kids may have stayed for lunch to that 70s would have been that transition zone from a few to it became the majority. And that's why in a number of the buildings, even at Oxford during our tour, Oxford has this little kitchen area that is completely inadequate and not very accessible the way you would want for a full kitchen these days. And they're nowhere near the kind of kitchen facilities you would need to run a real kitchen area. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think one other thing we have to remember when we look at these schools is that during the period that these schools existed, there was no community centers as we know
Exactly,
today.
right.
And so the school doubled for a school
Exactly.
and a community center.
Exactly. Oh, and I got one more question. Yes, ma'am. Right. Yeah, that's why I would love to get that some of the materials only recently, the interior floor plans and whatever for Fairfax. What's unfortunate in what the foundation and the school district have for archival material, you'd be very, very hit or miss. So, for example, we've got a big stack of Roosevelt photos because somebody apparently, I think the person who was photographing them that had sold them to the students, we were able to inherit them. You go to another building, Fairfax, the original Fairfax, pretty much the photos we have here, that's about it that we have from an archival nature. So that's why a lot of this is I'm asking, hey, if someone knows the answer, let us know. So, oh, Chris and I want to move. Yeah.
Last step to
Yeah, sure.
you after this. In the 70s, when so many of the buildings came down at once, this conversation makes me wonder whether a lot of it didn't have to do with all of the architectural issues that we're discussing, for auditoriums that are too big, gymnasiums that are too small, and no place to eat lunch.
If I recall correctly, and I want to move on, I remember looking at some levy data, which I wish I could find. It was a binder, a big, thick binder from the 1972 bond issue. And I believe that the cost to renovate the 4 buildings that were demolished was about $500,000. So $500,000 in 1972, it was $500,000 out of a $19.5 million issue. I think part of the motivation, and as I was only 3 at the time, I'm speculating, but I think a lot of it was, it's new, it's new, we can do it, there's air-conditioned buildings, what have you. And unfortunately, I think that when we see what we lost, and we look at today for adaptive reuse, and from a structural standpoint, a lot of the 1920s buildings are far better structurally than the replacement footprint buildings. And more time than not, whenever we see bad space use, pretty much almost all the problems stem from the 1970s. When you go to the core building of the high school, it's nice. The mechanicals are worn, but it's nice. The science wing's got problems. The 70s wing's got problems. But yeah, I don't want to editorialize too much because I have to be polite and I'll be on TV. But the 72 renovation is frequently, we see a lot of a lot of what were they thinking. So now this photo, try to get back on pace. This shows you Taylor Road, and then here would have been Superior's behind it, and then this is Washington here. I think it's Washington. There used to be a synagogue here that was torn down. In this photograph, basically this is the original building here and here. So what was eventually built for Taylor was a very, very large building. Let's see, this is probably from the 1930s. And then we got a couple photos from, looks like the late 50s, early 60s. But it was a great, real nice ornamentation and detail, nice stonework on it. It's obviously a little dark because of the age. And then the next one we've got, if I can get this to work. And then we have demolition of Taylor Road School. Again, this is going to show you you've got the auditorium and the gymnasium in the back. But it was a really, really large building. And that's why there's so many kids who went through it. And then we have, this is Boulevard. Another Warner building. You work with McCornack, who they also worked on the high school. Boulevard is not a very large building, as we can see here. It wasn't that big of a structure. And it had the giant exorbitant price tag. It cost them a whopping $267 to build in 1923. And it was designed to accommodate 500 students. So you think it's not that big a building with 570 kids in it. But this is where, these are the good pictures. So here we have it pretty soon after construction. A lot of ornamentation and detail. So we get another, and there's another great photograph. Real nice work. And what you'll see here is that this detail work here, and even this flourish here, That'll be there through the 50s. By the 1960s, it's been removed. Yes, ma'am. Boulevard, this is sort of on, if you're driving on Euclid Heights Boulevard, you know where the townhouse is? This is just to the north of that on Euclid Heights Boulevard. So where the sign that says the Wallstein Field, right there.
Same split of land as Roosevelt.
Exactly. But behind it. Yeah. And then we got, this is give you some more detailed work from Architectural Record Magazine. And let's see. And then we've got some color photographs here. Again, this is going to show you, this one's from the 1950s, and then these are from the 1960s, I think 1964, and you can see all that detail work has been removed. And then a very dark and forlorn photograph from the 60s, and then the Boulevard Breeze from 1927. Now this is Roxboro Junior High. This is where we're going to move much more into the John Graham period. And one of the things, there's a couple things I want to show in this illustration. This is the site map for the proposed building. First thing is, this is the current route, the 1926, the current route of North Park. So if you know when you're driving on North Park, there's that fork in the road. And you want to stay at the fork on the right, and yet you're supposed to go to the left. This is that fork. Now in 1926, the fork would have gone straight. And in reality, it's much more here. What this actually tells us is that about 2/3 of the field at Roxboro Junior High, or Roxboro Middle School, isn't actually the school districts. It's part of the Shaker Lakes Park. The other thing that's interesting too, and then also see how it connects here to North St. James, this is going to probably the reason why you have the difference in the width of the road as well. The other thing that's interesting I like to look at Roxboro is that the building's not that big. When we go to the next slide, as it was conceived, this is not a very big junior high. And the additions were only about, these would have been another 16 classrooms. The other thing, a couple of things we see later, we had these staircases on both sides of the building. By the 1950s, those will be closed. But the other thing, too, is we're moving into a different design concept where we have the auditorium, and then behind the auditorium is a gym. So when you had a basketball game and you're playing your competition from another school, you go to the auditorium, and that's where you sit to watch the competition. And people, you know, I guess my peers are like floored. They're like, they watch the game. I'm like, yeah, that's where you watch the basketball game. So you'd have the girls' gymnasium would have been the spectator gym, and then above it you'd have the boys' gym. So one of the things, again, conversely, it is a very efficient usage of the space. One of the things that I found on the tours for the facilities is these buildings are very, the exterior walls are load-bearing walls. So the highest concentration of structural steel is actually in this main core area here. And then these walls, part of the reason why these buildings have lasted so long is they're like these really thick walls because they're load-bearing walls. So here we have Roxboro in the 1930s or 40s. I like this photograph because we got the nice woody station wagon right there. Then we've got, you can see these doorways are here. Here we have Roxboro. There's a real good photograph from the late 50s, early 60s. And then this is, I pulled this one out here. I think it's on one of the posters around. This is one of the doorways that was closed in. Another reason I think it's a very, very simple, very almost like a New England prep school kind of a design, in my opinion. And then we have, this is Roxboro tennis courts. And for those who don't know, this is they had a number of the Davis Cup in the 1960s. So you have the Davis Cup being played here, and in the backdrop is Terminal Tower and downtown skyline. And then we have Roxboro today. One of the things that's nice, as much as the window replacements are not 100% authentic, they're a vast improvement over the windows they put on in the 70s. So I think it's like night and day when you see what we had for 30 years and what we have now. And then now we're getting up to the 1920s. We have Heights High, 1926. This is the architect's conceptual illustration. And it's pretty much what was built. So we have, and again, this is a cross-section here, front elevation. And it is, and what's nice, and I don't think I have the floor plan up here, but what was very interesting is that the floor plan of Heights was very well thought out. It was designed to have, and it was always designed to have additions, and it was very intelligent. The downside has been, and one of the most problems we see from a Heights High standpoint, as someone who's went there for a long time, is that, I went there for 3 years, not a long time, who's been in the building a lot, is that when we look at the additions and things that have happened, that's really altered the flow of the building. And a lot of the times in the 1958 to 62 period, they were just cramming in additions and any nook and cranny, and because of that, that's really what started to contort the design. So you have a contractor come in, he runs one thing, and then another contractor comes in, and that's really what's caused most of the mechanical issues, if you will. So here we have the 1950s, the big courtyard. And what's interesting is that a lot of that detail we saw in that illustration before, right here in the roof line, has been removed. If anyone knows why, I'd be interested. Now this is a redrawing of the original site plan, and you can see that originally, I'm not sure what street this is here, it bisected the site. There were a few homes built on here that they ended up, I think one or two of them ended up being moved onto Washington Boulevard. Derbyshire, okay. But there was a few homes here that ended up being relocated across the street. This wing here was built relatively sooner in the 1930s. But what's interesting is you can see here and in the back, and some of the photos will show you, that they originally intended to have a really nice landscape back door to the building, and it ended up being just a gravel cindered parking lot. So here we have, on the photo on the right is the main hallway, flagpole in the courtyard. What's great about that photo, I think, is that you got this intersection now, a bunch of trees in that area. This is 1920s, and it looks like a new development out in Solon or Twinsburg. And then we've got the staircase. Again, this is the 1920s. These, for those of you who are real familiar with the building, these were filled in at some time. And these staircases went to the basement, but didn't go anywhere until the 1960s when I think they added on as probably for air raid, duck and cover, get out of the building for access. Let's see. Here we have, if you were across the street near Wendy's, this would be what you're seeing from Heights High. And then here's an aerial photograph. This would be in the 1930s. So we've got the addition's been added on here. We don't have the social room, hasn't been added yet. A real good aerial photograph. And then this would be the probably early 1950s. We've got the social room addition's been added on, much more prominent stadium and field. And then we've got a couple things in this one. One is that this is the back of the building, and there's still attention to detail. We've got some students who look very anxious and eager reading their books in front of the science wing, and then a great photograph from the 1940s. And then we have from 58 to 62, after the district was unable to, I believe, pass a bond issue, instead of the issue of a second high school was resolved by the fact that they added on to Heights. And this is also a combination of adding on as opposed to building new, as well as in the post-Sputnik era. So we have a complete transformation. And this construction project was very layered. So they began with a lot of the sort of the infill projects where there was a courtyard where the band rooms are now, was an open-air courtyard. That was filled in. There was another space between the west gym and the building. That was filled in. So it was a very layered project. Here we have the science wing beginning the construction on that. And the building was in use during construction as well. So that's another nice logistical issue. So we have the south pool here. It was. So, I mean, that would have been lots of fun if you were a student at that time. And we have this is, again, the south pool being built. And then this would be the back of the building. And we recall in the earlier illustration of the site plan, it was sort of a nice landscaped entrance, and basically it had been a cindered parking lot. And then this is where the cafeteria was built. And the reason I'm showing this is that a couple reasons. One is that instead of it being nice and lush, it was just the kids and staff parked their cars. And the other thing was that when they built the cafeteria, some of the original drawings showed like a 2.5 pointing with the arrow. They were going to have a couple 2 stories above it that would have been classrooms. So we can only wonder, why not build vertical in the back as opposed to blocking out the front of the building, which we all wonder now. Why did they do that? It could be that in the 1950s and 60s you put on a attachment in the front of your building because that way it says progress as opposed to tucking around the back. Now the reason I have this is the auditorium at Heights. In the mid-1990s they undertook a very large renovation. So those of you who were if you remember from the 70s and the 80s, it would have been these wonderful fluorescent colored plastic chairs which quickly broke and weren't replaced. A ceiling, which doesn't come across that well in this image, maybe the next one. The ceiling, which is in this image, is nice painted and gilded. In the 1970s, it was all painted black and the walls were white. The district made spent a lot of time and effort to restore it. It really is probably the best public space in the community right now. And it quite possibly the best condition it was, because before the plastic seats, they would have been nice, comfortable wooden chairs. So, and then we have, here's Heights High from the front of Wendy's. So you can see the wonderful vista. And it's not just us. Lakewood had the same thing. Lakewood built their new wing right in front of their building. So now we have my alma mater, Oxford. And again, another Graham building. And what's interesting, I went to Oxford. I always thought that they built all this at once. But in fact, typical of the other buildings, front of the building, gymnasium, and then addition built just a couple years afterwards. The other thing, too, is that where it is on the site is always, you think, why is it, the address is like 989 Quilliams Road, and why does it face it? Originally, the plot was to have Oxford go through, so the building would have been right at the apex of that intersection. Here we have the front elevation. This is from in the blueprints, obviously nice little hand drawing of where the library would be added on. And here we have almost every photograph we ever see of Oxford is from this vista. One of the things that was interesting, too, as someone who went to Oxford, is that in all the different blueprints I looked in different eras, the playgrounds have always been thoroughly mediocre, is a polite way to put it. We have these wonderful, hey, kids, go play on a concrete pipe. But no, it's still a nice, solid building. Let's see. And there we have a collection of photographs. Again, every photograph is from the same vista. This nice detail work here, which is above the front door. And then we see this is there's a blueprint for it, which gives you a sense. And like the photograph we saw of Fairfax, you know, the building itself it's a very utilitarian structure, but right around they did do nice detail work around the entrances. And then here we have Oxford today. So when we have a nice formal entrance to a building, the best thing to do is to build a nice box right in front of it. Unfortunately, Oxford hasn't been the recipient of the replacement windows yet, and I was very disappointed when I was in the school board, I was always big about the roofs, because you got to keep the water out. That's the first thing I learned, keep the water out of the building. And whenever we were doing a building thing, I was like, we had the slate roofs on these buildings. I'm like, we're not replacing the slate, are we? No, we're not replacing the slate. Then I went to one of the buildings, and I went, now the roof, it was this asphalt shingles. I'm like, what did they do? Apparently, after I left the board, they replaced the slate roofs with asphalt shingles because they were afraid that there'd never been an incident in 80 years, but now we're afraid that the slate might fall off and hit a child, so they replaced all these slate roofs that had lasted for all these years with asphalt. So, again, I have to be diplomatic, but just to let you know they did that. I don't know if I don't think so. I think you gotta. So now, what's interesting, I always viewed Canterbury and Oxford as very, very similar in their basic layout. But the thing, what's interesting with Canterbury is where with Oxford you had the front of the building built and then a wing. At Canterbury, it was more like they built pretty much. This is the front of the building. They built the wing and then 2/3 of the front. Now, if anyone knows why they did that, I'd be very curious. It's a very odd thing. The other thing, too, which for an architect, I'm a big fan of symmetry. We see this at Oxford. Where the administrative offices are, the windows are smaller than the rest of the building. It's just a window. But we see here, the building was very much an L shape, and you've got this, the gymnasium in the back, very similar to Oxford. And one of the things from going in these touring these buildings is you can see in just a span of 10 years, the boiler rooms and mechanical rooms, and just a span went from being very, almost 19th century to the technologies much more spacious and easier to transverse. But again, we have Canterbury had this really nice formal entrance in the front. So here was a contractor photograph, real nice shrubberies and what have you, real nice looking building. Number of photographs. And in the 1950s, we have these slightly incongruent additions. Now, again, we're talking about those temporary structures. This one here, I was amazed. The illustrations and blueprints on that were very, very detailed. And then you got another one here at Canterbury in the front. So they were constantly having these, what they called these trailers, because the enrollment was always growing. So you would use these, very simple to throw up wooden structures, until you had enough, you passed a bond issue to add on an addition.
You've got half timbering on.
Exactly, yeah, I mean, yeah, well, that's the blueprints. These incredibly detailed blueprints, it's a temporary structure. And then here we have Canterbury today. So we have the addition from the 50s, and then you've got this very interesting library addition in the front, which completely obliterates the front entrance. Now we have Monticello, another John Graham building. Monticello, not just because I went there, is probably one of my favorite buildings in the district. And the next two illustrations are going to show you the evolution of the design concept. This is the original, one of the first drawings, or first concepts. Then we go to this, which is much more to what was built. And then this one, this is what was actually built. So we can, Monticello, in my opinion, from a floor plan standpoint, from an architectural standpoint, is really one of our best buildings. Let's see. Then we got the opening program from the 1930s and the floor plan as well. Now, in the 1970s, the cafeteria here would become classrooms. This courtyard filled in and turned into a giant sort of like a Hyatt hotel, kind of a library vibe, if you will. Now, part of the reason why we see what happened to our records and materials, I think I picked this up. I was working the library and was like, hey, we got these filing cabinets here. There's a bunch of stuff in it. Empty them out. Empty those filing cabinets out. And I'm fishing through. I'm like, oh, this looks interesting. I'll pull it out. So I have a feeling a lot of stuff that archival materials that we would love to have has been, just thrown away as time passed. So here we have Monticello in the 1950s. Nice tail fins right there. Now, one of the things we have a lot of photographs of the Monticello kids going on their trips to Washington. So that, again, it's what we have archival is very eclectic. So for some reason, somebody at Monticello was wise, and they saved this, and we got tons of these photos of the kids. And guy's got a suit and tie on. And the bus driver's looking real happy, too. Oh, yes, sir.
Monticello also had movies of every class of every year. Those are still existing?
We don't, if they are, I'd love to see them. We don't have them. I mean, if anyone does, that'd be awesome. But no, pretty much what the foundation and / the school district has primarily is going to be a lot of class photos, and particularly these, and that's pretty much it, unfortunately. One of the things that's interesting, I forgot to mention when Oxford, is we're, again, hit or miss. We have the PTA minutes for Oxford from the 1920s to real current, as well as they used to have like a father's play. And if someone wants to do a story about it, it'd be phenomenal. They have all the records for this father's play from the 20s and 30s up to for like 50 or 60 years of it. It's really interesting stuff. And then we have Monticello today. This is what's great about this photograph. Again, it shows you the impact that the replacement windows have had compared to what it was there before. I think the Jameson windows. Let's see. Okay, post-war. This is gonna be real quick. Post-war. So obviously now one of the things in the 1920s facility study, they were anticipating a lot more buildings to be built than they actually were constructed. So we have Belvoir, Northwood, Milliken, and Wiley all in the post-war period. Here's Northwood. I don't have very much on Northwood. If anyone has any information, please let me know, because this is pretty much it. The building was closed in the 80s and sold. Yes, sir.
Your original Northwood were Army Quonset House.
That would.
Then they built a new school behind the old Quonset House.
Okay.
Tore the Quonset House down.
Gotcha. So again, we're going to have we've got the temporary structures, and then we see what was built. Northwood was, like I said, closed in '86, and then sold to Betsafer Mizrachi as well. So it's no longer, we have no control over the property whatsoever. If someone's interested, you can make a good offer. Boulevard, which became Garrity. One of the things about Garrity, which I find interesting, is that from looking at the blueprints, again, this is in the post-war era, and it was, again, very much a layered building. They built the main core of the building, and then they built on another addition, and then another addition on the back as well. We have Milliken, very interesting design compared to a lot of our other structures, where each classroom has the access to the outside. The land was donated from Severance Milliken. And then we have a couple good color photographs of it. Had to put it in there because it's my father's alma mater. So. Then we have Wiley. Now, a couple things you'll notice in this Wiley, this is the architect's concept, is that not only hasn't the addition on the back been put on, but there's no auditorium. So that, again, this is a building that was very much a layered structure, which to me I'm struck by, because I would think that in today's era we would pretty much build the whole building at one time. Even in the post-war era, when they know they have the baby boom, they're doing it in a very layered structure. And we have the other thing that's missing. Now we have the auditorium, which they did a phenomenal renovation on it. Really, if you haven't been in there, it looks gorgeous. But there's no Board of Education building. And basically, I have no more slides, because what we have in the post-war era from '72 is that the demolition of 4 of the elementary buildings, Roosevelt as well, and then all the alterations, which I've been making fun of the entire evening. So you have a lot of questioning of, what were they doing, what were they thinking, a lot of good intentions, and unfortunately, there's still, what strikes me, you can see in the drawings here, there's still a lot of ornamentation and detail, but it's sort of hidden. It's underneath paint, it's underneath additions. Yes, sir.
I worked at the Board of Education 2 summers in Milliken Barn. They had the names of all the schools they tore down.
Oh, really?
Fairfax and Covent Street,
Oh, geez, I'll have to,
and the Cornerstone.
oh, wow, then I'll have to talk to Shergalis about that then. Well, that's one of the things. I've got copies of the blueprints for the barns, what the Milliken barns used to look like. And even though they were just barns, they're really nice little structures. So I'll have to talk to Steve Shergalis about taking a look at those. I know they did that for Fairfax. They have them out with the school name in the front. So I'll have to see about that. But no, the reason I didn't really put any pictures on that, because I thought we already had covered a lot of the material. But what you can see is that when the district's enrollment was a peak of around 12,500, which was still far below what the city fathers had planned it to be. And then you've had a slow progression of buildings being closed over time. And obviously I think I've conveyed my personal taste as far as the structures. I think what we have, a lot of our original buildings really still have the solid structure, the solid bones. It's just a matter of really, when we see when the district has taken the time and effort to renovate them, to scrape off the paint, undo the interesting color schemes from the '70s, you really get a good vibe. That's why, I was referring to Monticello. The first floor of Monticello, they've done new paint, tile, and you go to the second floor, it still has that 1970s. It's such a difference between the two floors that you really can take these great old buildings and with just a little bit of work, return them to where they are. Conversely, and I got to put a plug because I was on the facilities committee, the mechanical systems, though, really need a lot of work. It's really, you've got 1920s buildings with newer stuff, and it's still a lot of work needs to be done. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the photographs. If there's questions that hopefully I can answer, or somebody else in the room, that would be great. I don't know, Chris, what you... Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So are you actually saying that Derbyshire actually went through all the way?
Right. Originally, from the plat maps, it would have been Derbyshire went through. So you had all those streets that went from Lee Road to Goodnore, all went through. It originally would have been through it would have been platted out. There was a few homes built, and then when the city fathers, they were deciding where to put the high school, because from the 1920s facility study, they found that Cedar and Lee was the most central location, and so they picked up the property and closed off the street. Oh. Yes, ma'am.
You touched on playgrounds and equipment. Has there been any study on your photograph? There were no photographs of playgrounds.
Well, the same thing with Oxford. We have a couple of photographs of Fairfax. It has, like, when I was at Oxford, they had these cheese huts. And if you thought the concrete pipe was a wonderful playground, which really wasn't a bad thing, they used to have these, and I'm amazed that they had these sort of geometric shapes. It was like concrete, precast concrete. They would assemble, made like a little hut. And the thing is, you think about it now, if you thought the monkey bars were dangerous, you've got this concrete thing, the kid climbs up the side of it, there's no guardrail. If you think about it now, and there's right, what's below it? You got this concrete thing a kid climbs up to. If he falls over, he falls like 6 feet onto concrete. I mean, yeah, they finally realized to get rid of those. But no, the reason I mentioned Oxford, because when I was looking at the different blueprints, it was always seemed to be like an afterthought. Again, that's because I went to Oxford. I'm a little attached to it. Again, what we have in the photographic nature is very hit or miss. So that's why we're always putting a call out if folks have more materials, because there are so many huge holes in what we have from that nature.
Real quick, Joe. On the Historical Society's website, there are a couple of really neat photographs of the old Coventry playground. I can't speak for any other areas, but also speaking of changing perspectives on child safety, Coventry Playground also, as some people may recall, had an upper and a lower playground with the roughly 200-foot ramp that connected the upper and the lower that was skateboard heaven. And you would start at the upper playground, get on your skateboard, by the time you hit that lower playground, you were going 250 miles an hour. And also, and you couldn't even count the number of people who took headers off their skateboards going down there, but it was simply just an accepted part of growing up at that point, and they never once thought of turning it into rubber.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh.
It wasn't mentioned earlier in the discussion, but I'm inclined to believe that a lot of those safety buildings did have the areas in the sub-level that were also defense areas.
The WPA, or not WPA, the civil defense. Well, yeah, right, well, I mean, the buildings weren't originally designed for that, but subsequently they would have used them in the Cold War for that, because they still, I think they finally have now decommissioned the little signs for those. So, yes, ma'am.
I can't remember, I didn't live here then, when Cleveland Heights Union District next joined
As a school district, I'm going to defer to, I think Dr. Morton might know that. Okay. Yeah, because I don't know, because I think part of the impetus for that, because I remember there used to be like the Russo's newsletter they had a newspaper, and there at the time Cleveland Heights was debating, do they keep annexing land all the way to Chagrin Falls, which I think probably would have been good financially, but Idlewood Village, part of the reason if you look at the boundaries for where the districts are, like, why is that part of South Euclid part of Cleveland Heights? Because when Cleveland Heights, at that time period, when the people who lived there had a choice, South Euclid is going to be far less developed than Cleveland Heights. Therefore, whoever owns that land is going to want to, more likely than not, for University Heights, it made more sense, or at that time, Idlewood Village, it made more sense to join with Cleveland Heights for the academics. Yes, ma'am.
Through the war years, no schools were built, and there were no schools in University Heights.
Right.
Therefore, the children went to school in Cleveland
Yeah.
Heights. I mean, that was.
Well, you had the same situation with,
I
I'm sorry.
went to Canterbury, and in 5th grade, we then got bused to Fairfax because Canterbury was so crowded.
Right. Well, if you look at Canterbury is right on the border for the cities. I remember, I think for a number of years, Beechwood, you have those other communities. Beechwood's high school students were going to Shaker Heights High School until they had enough of a population to sustain their own school system. You would frequently do that. Cleveland Heights, in the real old turn of the 100 years ago, when we were breaking off from East Cleveland, there was still the issue of where the high school students go. They would have been going to East Cleveland schools. Until you have developed enough of an infrastructure, that was what you more likely than not do.
Well, and they couldn't build.
Exactly. Right. Well, that's the other thing too, is when you think about it from a construction standpoint. I referenced it in the article. From about 1910 to 1930, 32, they were either building a new building or adding onto a building every single year. And then after the war, the same thing from about 45 until 62, 64. You're adding on to buildings. You're building new structures constantly. So the only time you really had no school construction would have been from about 1932 to 1945. Yes, sir.
I had a suggestion, but that brings up the question. Can you say anything about the origin of the relationship between Cleveland Heights and the East Cleveland School District and how that has evolved and at what point? Because, you know, there's the complex thing about taxation and so forth.
The only thing I know when you look at I think it's more of the same way a large part of Cleveland Heights Village broke off to become Shaker Village. I think it's a matter of you want to be your own entity in government and that kind of a thing. The only thing I can give any definitive knowledge about would be, or and even that's sort of speculative, is which is sort of contradiction, Caledonia portion of Cleveland Heights that goes to East Cleveland. If you look at, I've got a copy of the map from a 1912 plat map. That was John D. Rockefeller's farmland and estate. It was East Cleveland Schools because proximity. I think at that juncture, at that time, it was probably you wanted to be part of East Cleveland Schools as opposed to that rural school district, and that's why I wish there was a way to address it. The current district boundary zigzags parcel by parcel to right behind the JCC, which it is this very circuitous route. And it would be great if there was a way to, okay, let's make it north, at least make it Monticello. But I hate to a degree, because I was on the school board when this was broached, if you begin to start moving that line to that, when do you stop? And by the time that it became, okay, would you want to change, you know, it didn't occur. So most of our boundaries predate the development, or well before the development. So you have a couple of precincts in Warrensville Heights, go to the Orange School District. Richmond Mall, for the most part, is in the South Euclid-Lyndhurst School District because the boundaries where the farms were and who was at the time is very, so you have your boundaries are a result of that.
So the suggestion, I wonder, you mentioned several times this evening about you rued the fact that you do not have artifacts from the history of the school of various sorts, and from papers to photos, the interior, and so forth. I wonder if you attempted to kind of put out the word through the Sun Press, which I haven't seen, through the, and now Facebook or whatever, because people have got these things and they're throwing them away. Well,
that's what we'll periodically say if you've got materials. And we did recently we requested a school building saying, hey, it was sort of funny. We said to the schools, hey, let us check your library, see if you have anything in the back in the shelf or what have you. So we get a call, oh, they got some stuff over at Roxboro. So I go over to Roxboro. I know the principal. I go, okay, yeah, I'm here. I was told you guys have some stuff. What do you have? She goes, oh, we have these pictures on the wall. I'm like, there's 3 pictures. I'm like, okay. I thought, yeah, oh, well, we have these old school books. I mean, they're actually old school books. I'm like, well, that's really nice, but, I'm not. But and unfortunately, that's the situation is that, like I said, here I'm a student in junior high. The librarian says, oh, empty these filing cabinets out. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know how much. We're always picking up old yearbooks. So whenever we have the opportunity, and we have the wonderful framed photos in the back, that collage there, it really ends up being if somebody says, hey, I've got these, are you interested? We're always trying to grab stuff like that. Any other questions, comments, or anything? Well, thank you folks for coming. Grab some stuff in the back, and thank you very much.
Folks, real quick, I'm Chris Roy, and I'm from the Cleveland Heights Historical Society, and I'd like to also thank Eric for joining us tonight. Just a couple quick things that I wanted to bring up first without belaboring the conversation too much. First of all was when Eric was talking about Oxford School, I think that it bears mention that Oxford School is also home to a truly unique collection of Depression-era Works Progress Administration art. I believe the informal curator of that either is or was Donaline Poduska, who is here tonight. There she is. And if anybody has an opportunity to stop by Oxford School, the frescoes on the walls of the main hallway will absolutely amaze you.
The other thing is, and Eric did briefly touch on the tennis courts at Roxboro Middle School, and mentioned that during the 1960s, and I believe actually going back to the 1950s, that is where some of the most major tennis championships in the world were played. And some of the finest tennis players the world has ever seen, from Billie Jean King to Margaret Court to Clark Grabner and Kenny Rosewall, all played on those courts. Arthur Ashe played there, Manola Santana, Eli Nastasi, for those of you who are tennis fans. And one of the things that's funny to recall in conjunction with that is that these guys, who were the absolute premier tennis players of the day, they changed their clothes in the Roxboro Middle School bathrooms. Compare that to the circumstances that the Pete Sambrases and Roger Federers of today enjoy, and there is really quite a contrast. In any event, this lecture is being recorded and will be available on the Cleveland Heights, the City of Cleveland Heights' website, as well as, I believe, its YouTube channel within a couple weeks, if any of you desire to re-experience this fine historical event. And I should also mention that roughly two months from right now, we will have another lecture at the schoolhouse, back at the schoolhouse, because supposedly the Cumberland parking lot will be completed by that time. And that will feature a history and what you might call a prehistory of the newly christened Forest Hill development, which is the area of Cleveland Heights bordered by Euclid Heights, roughly Washington Boulevard, Lee, and Coventry, that was just recently put on the National Register of Historic Places. And that will be put on by a Cleveland Heights Historical Society trustee, Corby Roberts, and she will do what you might call the prehistory of the area, and that will be followed by Cleveland State Professor Mark Souther, who will be doing the history of the area from its initial development roughly in the 1920s to the present day. So it's going to be June 23rd. There is a flyer, that purple sheet on the back table if you want to take it, and we will also be sending out the same kind of mailers and hopefully get some articles into the news media as well, and we hope you'll join us at the schoolhouse for that event. So once again, thanks very much to Eric Silverman, and thanks also to you, all of you, for coming. We appreciate it.